She had spent 6 months learning how to disappear inside a room full of people. Stand near the wall. Keep your voice low. Never let them see your hands shake. And for the love of everything you still believe in, do not, under any circumstances, let the most dangerous man in the city see the bruises beneath your collar. Selina Vale had rules. The rules had kept her alive. Until the morning, Damien Blackthorne called her into his office, locked the door behind her, and said 4 words that shattered every defense she had ever built. Who hurt you, Selina? This is the story of a woman who survived everything, except the patience of a man who refused to look away. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that like button right now. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story has traveled, and stay with me until the very end, because what happens between Selina Vale and Damien Blackthorne will leave you breathless. The elevator doors opened at 6:47 in the morning, and Selina Vale stepped out onto the 42nd floor of Blackthorne Global, wearing a silk turtleneck in the middle of July. The receptionist at the front desk, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who had worked for the company for 11 years and survived 4 executive assistants before Selina, glanced up from her monitor and said nothing. Her eyes did the thing they always did when Selina came in early. A quick sweep, a small tightening around the mouth, then back to the screen. Selina had learned to read that look in women. The recognition, the careful silence that meant I see it, but I won't say it because you haven't asked me to. She appreciated Patricia more than the woman would ever know. The 42nd floor of Blackthorne Global was a different world from the street below. All clean glass and cold marble, the kind of space designed to communicate a single message before anyone spoke a word. You are smaller here. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city like eyes that never blinked. The furniture was dark, expensive, and arranged with surgical precision. Even the plants in the corners looked like they had been warned not to grow too enthusiastically. Selina's desk sat directly outside the double doors of Damien Blackthorne's private office, positioned so that anyone seeking access to the man had to pass through her first. 6 months ago, when the placement agency sent her here on what was supposed to be a 3-week temporary contract, she had thought the positioning was practical, a gatekeeper, an organizer, someone to manage the calendar and filter the noise. She understood now that it was something else. Damien Blackthorne did not place things without intention. She settled into her chair, pulled up the morning brief on her monitor, and began moving through the day's agenda with the mechanical efficiency she had spent years perfecting. Conference call at 8 with the Tokyo office, board meeting at 10, lunch with Senator Hartwell's chief of staff, which would run long because it always did. Site visit postponed from last Thursday, rescheduled to 3. Then the evening charity event, the Blackthorne Foundation's annual fundraiser, which meant Damien would need the black folder with the donor profiles, the revised budget presentation, and the seating chart she had redrawn twice at his request. She worked. She breathed carefully. She kept her shoulders level and her face neutral, the way she had taught herself to sit in rooms where she felt watched. The turtleneck was cotton silk blend, lightweight, and still too warm for the aggressive air conditioning that kept the 42nd floor at 68 degrees year-round. She had chosen it at 5 in the morning while standing in her bathroom mirror with the overhead light too bright and her hands still unsteady, looking at the discoloration that curved from her left shoulder up toward the base of her neck. Not terrible. Mostly yellow at the edges now, fading. The kind of bruise that another week would erase completely. She had covered worse. At 7:30, Marcus arrived. Damien's head of security, a former military man built like a piece of architecture, who communicated primarily in single syllables and had never once looked at Selina with anything approaching curiosity. He checked the floor, confirmed the entry points, nodded once at Patricia, and positioned himself near the elevator bank. At 7:58, the elevator opened again. Selina did not look up from her screen. She did not need to. She felt it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, a shift in the air, a subtle recalibration of the room's energy. Everyone on the 42nd floor felt it. Shoulders straightened, keyboards slowed. Even the ambient noise of the building seemed to dim slightly, as though the ventilation system had been briefly informed that Damien Blackthorne was walking through it. She heard his footsteps, measured, never hurried. The footsteps of a man who understood that rooms rearranged themselves around his pace. "Morning," he said, not to anyone in particular, though everyone within earshot responded with their own quiet versions of acknowledgement. His voice was the kind of thing that registered in the chest before the brain processed it. Low, controlled. Not loud. Damien Blackthorne had never needed to raise his voice in his life because the alternative was always implied. Selena had watched CEOs stammer in response to that voice. She had watched a federal investigator lose his train of thought mid-sentence. She had spent 6 months building immunity to it. She had failed completely. The Tokyo call moved to 8:15, she said without looking up, pulling the revised schedule from the stack beside her keyboard. Nakamura's flight was delayed. I've already notified the participants. The board meeting is confirmed. Hartwell's office called to say, Selena. She stopped. Something in the way he said her name. Not impatient, not commanding. Something quieter than both of those things, and therefore more dangerous. She looked up. Damien Blackthorne was standing 2 feet from her desk, his suit jacket already perfect despite the fact that he had presumably been awake since before dawn. He always had, and his dark eyes were looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before in 6 months of proximity. It wasn't the calculating assessment he used in boardrooms. It wasn't the careful neutrality he wore like armor in public. It was something more direct than either of those things, and it was aimed at the neckline of her turtleneck with a precision that made her stomach drop. Come inside, he said. 2 words. No room for misinterpretation. Selena stood, gathered her tablet, kept her face exactly as empty as she needed it to be, and followed him through the double doors. His office was the kind of space that would have felt oppressive if it weren't for the windows. The entire eastern wall was glass, and at this hour the morning light came through it at an angle that turned everything amber and gold, which she had always found incongruous, all that warmth in a room designed for cold decisions. His desk was massive and almost entirely clear. He kept nothing on its surface that he didn't need. A single legal pad. A pen. Whatever file was currently demanding his attention. He did not go to his desk. He stood near the window with his back to the city, and he looked at her, and he waited. Selena stood near the door because standing near the door was instinct, and she kept her tablet in front of her chest like it was a clipboard at a job interview, and she looked back at him and said, "The Hartwell meeting." His office called to reschedule. They want to push it to Thursday, but that conflicts with the quarterly review, so I was thinking, put the tablet down. She stopped again. Selena. His voice hadn't changed, still quiet, still controlled. Put it down and tell me what's under that collar. The room was very still. The city outside the windows went on existing without any awareness of what was happening 42 floors above it, taxis and pedestrians, and the whole indifferent machinery of urban life. And inside this glass box, Selena Vale felt the floor shift slightly beneath her feet, the way it always did when she had been seen by someone she hadn't given permission to look. It's July, he said. You've worn 3 different turtlenecks this week. Last Tuesday, it was a scarf. The week before that, you had foundation along your jaw that didn't quite match. He paused. I'm not asking to embarrass you. I'm asking because I need to know. She set the tablet on the chair beside her. Her hands, she noticed distantly, were very steady. She had gotten good at that. The body learns to perform calm even when the inside is screaming. It's not relevant to work, she said. That's not what I asked. Mr. Blackthorne, who hurt you? The question landed like something physical. 4 words, quiet as anything, and they went through every layer she had built. The professional competence, the careful distance, the 6 months of practiced invisibility, and found the thing underneath that she never let anyone near. She stood there for a moment that felt much longer than it was, and she looked at the man who ran an empire on the principle that information was power, who had dismantled 3 competing corporations in the past 2 years alone, who was feared with a consistency and comprehensiveness that she had never encountered in anyone else. And she made a decision she knew she would spend weeks regretting. She told him the truth. Not all of it. Not yet. Just the shape of it, the rough architecture of the thing she had been living inside for most of her adult life. Her mother's boyfriend, 2 years now, moving in after 6 months of what looked from the outside like love and revealed itself from the inside as something else entirely. The way violence in that kind of situation doesn't announce itself, doesn't arrive fully formed. How it escalates in increments small enough that each individual step feels survivable until you look back and can't find the beginning anymore. She told him about last weekend, The argument that started over something stupid, just it was always something stupid. That was the thing. The triggers were always so disproportionate to what followed. And the way she had positioned herself between her mother and the man, and what that positioning had cost her. She told him flatly, without drama, the way she had learned to describe things that had happened to her body as though they had happened to someone else. It was a mechanism. It worked. Most of the time. Damien Blackthorne stood at his window and listened without moving. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't call anyone in, didn't make any of the faces she had braced for. The pity, which she found unbearable, or the discomfort, which she found worse because it made her feel responsible for managing his reaction on top of everything else. He just listened, and his expression was very still, and his eyes were on her with an intensity that she recognized as something other than surveillance. When she finished, the silence held for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to help." She had known it was coming. She had known it the way you know a wave is going to break before it does. And she had her answer ready because she'd rehearsed it 100 times in her head across 100 different scenarios, every version of this conversation that she'd imagined having one day with someone. "No," she said. "Thank you, but no." He looked at her. "Why not?" "Because I've watched how help works," she said. "Someone helps you, and then they own the helping. It becomes a debt. The help becomes a leash." She kept her voice even. "I've been on the end of leashes before. I don't do that anymore." Something moved through his expression. Not offense, something more complicated. "I'm not offering a trade," he said. "Everyone offers a trade." "Not everyone. Mr. Blackthorne." She kept her voice professional, precise, and aimed it at the space between them like a boundary marker. "You're the most powerful man I've ever worked for. Possibly the most powerful man I've ever been in a room with. Men with that kind of power don't do things for free. I'm not saying that to insult you. I'm saying it because it's the most consistent thing I've ever observed about how the world works." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not wrong," he said finally. "As a general principle, you're not wrong. I know. But I'm asking you to consider that general principles have exceptions." "I've been waiting for the exception my whole life," she said. "I don't find them often enough to bet on them." He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was still coming through the window behind him, and she couldn't read his face clearly against it, which felt like a disadvantage she didn't need. Then he said, "All right." She blinked. "All right what?" "All right, I won't push." He moved away from the window, went to his desk, picked up the legal pad. "Schedule the Hartwell meeting for Thursday and move the quarterly review to Wednesday afternoon. I'll handle the conflicts." He looked up. "That'll be all." She stood there for one more second, caught off balance by the abruptness of it. The conversation ending without a fight, without pressure, without the push she had been steeling herself to resist. Then she picked up her tablet and went back to her desk. She sat down. She pulled up the calendar. She moved the meetings. And she spent the rest of the morning waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't. What happened instead was this. At 11:45, when she was deep in the budget reconciliation for the Foundation's gala, a cup of coffee appeared on the corner of her desk. Not from the communal kitchen pot. The good kind. From the place on the ground floor that she went to every morning when she got off the subway. The order she always got: oat milk, 1 sugar, the size she always chose when she was settling in for a long work stretch. Patricia had gone to lunch. Nobody else on the floor would have known the order. Selena looked at the coffee for a long moment. Then she picked it up and drank it and went back to the budget. The next 3 days passed the way work days pass when you are trying very hard not to notice something. She noticed things anyway. She was a woman who had survived by paying attention, and old habits don't stand down just because you tell them to. She noticed that Marcus, Damien's head of security, began making his evening rounds of the parking structure at the same time she finished work. She had always left after Damien. It was the nature of the role. And the parking structure was not on Marcus's usual route. She noticed this without remarking on it, and Marcus noticed that she noticed, and they reached a silent mutual understanding that neither of them would acknowledge it. She noticed that her mother called her on Thursday to say that the lock on her apartment door had been replaced. The deadbolt had been sticking for months, had been sticking since before the boyfriend moved in, and her mother hadn't noticed it, which meant someone had arranged the repair without her mother knowing who initiated it. Her mother assumed the building management had finally responded to a maintenance request. Selena knew her mother hadn't submitted any maintenance request, because she had inherited Selena's particular brand of not asking for help from anyone. She noticed flowers on her desk on Friday morning, white and small, and arranged in a way that wasn't showy, just present. No card. She drank her coffee, which was already there when she arrived, and she looked at the flowers, and she looked at the double doors to Damien's office, and she thought, he said he wouldn't push. The trouble was that what he was doing was worse than pushing. The gala was Friday evening, held in the rooftop ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, 3 blocks from Blackthorn Global. Selena had spent 6 weeks organizing the event: the catering, the donor outreach, the silent auction, the lighting and the flowers, and the security logistics, and the 15-minute presentation that Damien would give about the foundation's work that year. She was good at events. She was good at most things she put her hands to, which had sometimes felt like the cruelest joke the universe ever played on her. All this competence, deployed in service of survival. She arrived an hour before guests to do a final walkthrough, wearing the one good dress she owned, a dark green that her mother had bought her 2 Christmases ago, and that she had saved for exactly this kind of occasion because she couldn't afford another one. The ballroom was beautiful. She had made it beautiful. That was something. Guests began arriving at 7. She worked the edges of the room with her tablet and her earpiece, and her awareness turned outward in the way it always was in large social spaces, tracking entrances and exits, and the changing social topography of a room full of powerful people. She saw Damien move through the space the way he always did, unhurried, contained, the still center of every conversation he entered. He wore his power the way some people wore expensive clothes, naturally, without effort, without seeming to notice it. She watched him with the donors and the politicians and the foundation board members. And she watched the way people angled themselves toward him without meaning to, the human gravitational pull of someone that kind of powerful. He found her at 8:30, near the edge of the room where she was reviewing the run of show for the presentation. "The Hendersons want a tour of the foundation's new site," he said, close enough that she could hear him clearly without raising his voice. "Monday morning, add it to the calendar." "Done," she said, making the note. He didn't leave. She glanced sideways. He was looking out at the room rather than at her, which was somehow more uncomfortable than the alternative. "You did this," he said, which wasn't quite a statement and wasn't quite a question. "The event committee. You did this," he said again, just as quiet. "The committee did what you told them to do." She didn't argue with it because it was true. "The Henderson tour," she said. "I'll need their preferred arrival time." "Selena," he turned slightly toward her, "how's your mother?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, so completely outside the professional register of every previous conversation they'd ever had in this room, that she had no ready response for it. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "I'm asking," he said, "because I want to know. Not because I want to show you that I know things. Just, I'm asking." She looked at him. The ballroom glowed around them. Someone laughed too loudly somewhere near the bar. "She's okay," Selena said carefully. She paused. "The lock got fixed. She seemed less stressed this week." He nodded once, said nothing else about it. "The tour," he said. "I'll find out their arrival preference and let you know tonight." Then he went to give his presentation, and Selena stood at the edge of the room and watched him, and felt something she didn't have a clean name for opening up in her chest like a fault line. She drove home that night in the car service she always used on late work evenings, and she sat in the back of the sedan and watched the city slide by outside the window. And she thought about men and their patience, and the way sometimes patience is just pressure wearing a different coat. She thought about that for a long time. She was still thinking about it on Saturday when her phone rang, and it was her mother's number, which normally wouldn't have made her stomach clench, but her mother never called before noon on weekends. "Mom," she said. Her mother's voice was tight in the specific way that meant she was trying very hard not to sound scared. "He came by." Selena sat up straight on her couch. "Where are you?" "Home." "He didn't come in. The new lock. He couldn't get the key to work. And then he started knocking, and I didn't open the door." Her mother exhaled. "But he was out there for almost an hour. Selena, he was just standing on the street after that, looking up at my window." Selena's hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles ached. "Are you safe right now?" she asked. "Yes, he left. It's been 2 hours. Don't open the door for anyone tonight. She stopped. She thought about what she was going to say, which was, "I'll call the police," which she had said before, which had accomplished exactly as much as it always accomplished in these situations, which was very little. "I'll come," she said instead. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. She was in the subway 3 minutes later, and she sat in the rattling car with her phone in her lap, and she stared at the fluorescent lights, and she thought about the conversation she'd had in Damien Blackthorne's office 4 days ago. "I'm going to help." "No, thank you, but no, I'm not offering a trade." She thought about the coffee, the flowers, the lock, the car at night. She thought about a man who said, "I won't push," and then proceeded to demonstrate exactly how much could be accomplished without pushing. She called her mother back and stayed on the line for the whole 40-minute ride, talking about nothing important. Her mother's neighbor's cat, a recipe her mother had seen on television, the weather forecast for next week, keeping the line open, keeping the fear manageable. Her mother was fine when she arrived. Physically fine, which was the only measurement that mattered in these situations, even though both of them knew it wasn't the whole story. They sat together in the small apartment and drank tea and watched television and didn't talk about him, because that was also something they had learned. Sometimes naming the thing just made it bigger. Selena stayed until midnight. On the subway home, in the nearly empty car with its flickering overhead light and the distant sound of the train on the track, she opened her phone. She looked at the contact labeled Blackthorne, D, work, and she looked at it for a long time. She did not call. She put the phone away. She got off at her stop and walked the 2 blocks to her building and let herself in and stood in her apartment in the dark for a moment before turning on the light. She showered. She put on clothes she could sleep in. She lay down on her bed and stared at the ceiling. At 1:14 in the morning, her phone lit up on the nightstand. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Your mother's building has security monitoring tonight. She's safe. Sleep." Selena stared at the message for a very long time. She should have been angry. She had built her entire adult self on the right to be angry at exactly this kind of unilateral, uninvited intervention. The presumption of someone deciding for you what protection looked like without consulting you first. She pressed the phone face down on the nightstand. She closed her eyes. And she thought, "He said he wasn't the man I was afraid he'd become." She thought, "I want to believe that." She thought, "That is the most dangerous thought I have ever had." Monday morning arrived the way Monday mornings arrive when you've spent the weekend with your walls up and your thoughts in circles, with the particular bleakness of exhaustion that isn't quite about sleep deprivation, but about the mental cost of being vigilant for too long without a break. Selena arrived at 6:43. The floor was empty except for Patricia, who looked up, did the sweep, made the small tightening around the mouth. "Coffee's already at your desk," Patricia said. It was. Same order, same cup. Selena sat down and looked at it. Damien arrived at 7:58, same as always, and stopped at her desk on his way through, which he didn't always do. "Your weekend?" he said. It was barely a sentence, more like a question that hadn't decided what kind of question it was. She looked up. "Fine," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "The text," he said. "I should have asked first." She was quiet. "I know that," he said. "I'm not asking you to forgive the presumption. I'm just acknowledging it." She thought about all the ways she had rehearsed refusing him, all the careful architecture she had built around the idea of not letting someone like him get close enough to use her softness against her. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone, tight and careful, and trying not to be scared. She thought about a man who sat alone on the floor outside her building at 1 in the morning, not to frighten her, but because he was watching for a threat she couldn't neutralize herself. "The Henderson tour is confirmed for 10, she said. "I've prepared the briefing packet." He looked at her for one more second, then, "Good. Thank you." He went through the double doors. She turned to her screen, and she thought about what her mother had said to her once, years ago, before everything went wrong. The most terrifying thing isn't the people who want to hurt you. It's the people who want to help, and might actually mean it, because with those ones, you have no idea where you stand. She thought about that for the rest of the morning. She was deep in the Henderson briefing packet when her phone rang. Not her work line. Her personal cell, which she kept on silent during work hours and never received calls on from numbers she didn't know. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Ms. Vale," a man's voice. flat, careful. My name is Carl Duvain. You don't know me, but I know a friend of yours from a long time back, Daniel Rourke. The name hit her like cold water. Daniel Rourke was her mother's boyfriend's brother. I think, the man said, that we should have a conversation about what's going to happen next, before your new boss decides to make things complicated. Selena sat very still at her desk. The city gleamed outside the 42nd floor windows. The air conditioning hummed. How did you get this number? She said. Ms. Vale, the man said, that's really the least important question you could be asking right now. She looked at the double doors to Damien's office. She looked at her phone. She thought about everything she had refused, every offer she had deflected, every wall she had maintained with such exhausting precision. And then Daniel Rourke's brother said, tell your boss to back off, or your mother's situation gets a lot more complicated than a broken lock and a man standing on the street. The line went dead. Selena set her phone down on the desk. Her hands were perfectly steady. She stood up. She walked to the double doors and she opened them and she went inside, and Damien Blackthorne looked up from his desk and saw something in her face that brought him fully upright in his chair. Sit down, she said. He sat. I need to tell you something, she said, and then I need you to hear it without making any decisions before I finish talking. Can you do that? He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression, something that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it, the look of a man recalibrating. Yes, he said. Selena sat down in the chair across from his desk, and she looked at the man she had spent 6 months refusing to trust, and she opened her mouth and told him everything. She had spent her whole life knowing when the real danger was about to begin, and as Damien Blackthorne's expression went very quiet and very still across that massive desk, the particular stillness of a man deciding something, Selena Vale understood, with absolute clarity, that the choice she had just made could not be undone. The question now wasn't whether Damien would act. It was whether she could survive what acting looked like for a man like him. Damien didn't move for a long time after she finished talking. That was the thing about him that she had never been able to fully account for. The stillness. Most men, when they were angry, leaked it. You could see it in the jaw, the hands, the way breathing changed. She had become an expert at reading those signals because her survival had depended on it for years. The subtle shift in posture that meant you had 30 seconds to leave the room. The quality of silence that preceded something worse than silence. Damien's stillness was different. It wasn't the stillness of a man containing rage. It was the stillness of a man deciding, calculating, moving pieces on a board she couldn't see, and the thing that made her chest tight wasn't fear of what he'd do to her. She had moved past that particular fear somewhere in the last 48 hours without quite noticing. But fear of what he'd do to everything around her. She had finished talking 2 minutes ago. She had told him about the call, about Carl Duvain, about Daniel Rourke's name and what it meant. She had told him flatly, without editorializing, the way she told him about scheduling conflicts or budget discrepancies. She had given him information, and now she was waiting, and she hated waiting. Say something, she said. He looked at her. I'm thinking. Think out loud. No. She sat back in the chair. Mr. Blackthorne. Damien. She blinked. He had never told her to call him that. In 6 months, never once. She had been Ms. Vale, and he had been Mr. Blackthorne, and that professional distance had been one of the few clean lines she had managed to maintain. Damien, she said, and the word felt strange in her mouth, too familiar, a door opening that she wasn't sure she'd chosen to open. What are you thinking? He leaned forward and put his forearms on the desk and looked at her directly, and she felt the full weight of that attention, the way you feel direct sunlight after being indoors. Sudden, total, impossible to ignore. I'm thinking, he said, that Carl Duvain made a mistake calling you directly. That tells me either he's sloppy, which I doubt, or he wanted you scared enough to pass the message along without really thinking about what the message reveals. Which is what? That they know about me, that they know I'm involved, even marginally, which means someone is watching this building, or watching your mother's building, or watching you. He paused. That's not a casual threat. That's surveillance. She processed that. How long? I don't know yet. He picked up his phone, typed something, set it back down. Marcus is already on it. She thought about all the mornings she had walked into this building, all the evenings she had left, all the time she had gone to her mother's apartment on the subway, assuming she was anonymous in the crowd. "I want to know if you're putting anyone in danger by doing this," she said. "If involving yourself makes it worse for my mother, it doesn't make it worse. You don't know that." "I know Carl Duvain," he said. The way he said it, flat, factual, a piece of information filed under things that are simply true, stopped her cold. "How?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read clearly. "The Blackthorn Foundation isn't the only thing I run," he said. She had known this. Of course she had known this. You didn't work for a man like Damien Blackthorn for 6 months without understanding that the 42nd floor was not the whole picture. You didn't watch federal investigators drop their train of thought in his presence without understanding that the source of that particular deference went deeper than corporate success. She had known it the way you know things you've decided not to examine too closely. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated. "Are you going to tell me more than that?" "Not right now." He stood up. "I need you to do something for me." She almost laughed. There it was, the trade. The thing she had been waiting for since the beginning. He must have seen something in her face because he said, "It's not what you're thinking." "You don't know what I'm thinking." "I have a reasonable guess." He came around the desk, not toward her, just moving, the way he sometimes moved when he was working through something. She tracked him automatically, the way she always tracked movement in rooms, and then made herself stop because she was not going to sit here monitoring him like a threat. "I need you," he said, "to go about your day exactly as you normally would. Don't change your routine. Don't tell your mother anything yet. Don't call the police." He stopped near the window. "I need about 12 hours. 12 hours to do what?" "To understand the shape of what we're dealing with." "And while you're understanding the shape," she said, "my mother is sitting in her apartment alone." "She's not alone." He turned to look at her. "She has 2 people in the building who don't look like anything in particular and who will make sure nothing happens." Selena stared at him. "You put people on her building before I even told you about the call." "Yes." "Before this morning?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, working through the implications of that. "When?" "Saturday night." She thought about the text. "Your mother's building has security monitoring tonight. She's safe. Sleep." "You assumed," she said carefully, "that when her boyfriend came back, it would escalate." "I didn't assume. I know how it works." Something in the way he said it. Not theoretical, not academic. Personal, in the specific way that knowledge acquired from proximity is always personal. She didn't ask him to elaborate. She filed the information and moved on, the way she always filed things that might matter later. 12 hours, she said. "Yes." "And then what?" "And then you'll know everything I know," he said, "and we'll decide together what happens next. Together." She turned the word over. "That's not how you usually operate." "No," he said, "it's not." She stood up. She straightened her jacket. She picked up the tablet from the chair where she'd left it. "The Henderson tour is at 10, she said. "I'll have your briefing materials on your desk in 20 minutes. She went back to her desk. She spent the next 2 hours working with the precise mechanical focus that had gotten her through every hard day of her adult life. The ability to subdivide attention, to give the surface task everything it needed, while the deeper part of her mind ran its own parallel processing. She prepared the Henderson briefing. She managed 3 calls. She rerouted a catering invoice that had gone to the wrong department. She answered 14 emails. She did not look at her phone. She did not look at the double doors. At 9:55, the Hendersons arrived. A couple in their late 60s, old money, the kind of donors whose checks had enough zeros that you treated the entire interaction like diffusing something. Selena managed the greeting, the pleasantries, the handoff to Damien, all of it smooth and professional and completely automatic. Marcus appeared at her elbow as the Hendersons went through to the conference room. "You doing all right?" he said. Marcus said this the way other people said fire exit is to your left. Informational, devoid of particular emotional content. "Fine," she said. He nodded once and drifted back toward the elevator bank, and she watched him go and thought about the fact that he had been here before she arrived this morning, that he was always here before she arrived, and wondered how much of what happened in this building Marcus simply knew without being told. The morning continued. The Henderson tour ran long, which she had anticipated, and she used the time to work through the Foundation's upcoming grant review, which was 3 weeks out and already running behind because 2 of the board members couldn't agree on the evaluation criteria. She sent 3 carefully diplomatic emails that were designed to move the disagreement forward without taking sides, which was one of the skills she had never expected her particular background to be useful for in an office setting. At 12:40, her personal phone buzzed. Her mother, checking in. "Everything fine here. Made soup. Do you want me to save you some?" Selena looked at the message for a moment. She thought about her mother, 61 years old, in the small apartment that she had lived in for 20 years and that had become both her sanctuary and her trap, making soup on a Monday afternoon and thinking about whether her daughter might want some. Not knowing about Carl Duvane, not knowing about the 2 people in the building who didn't look like anything in particular. She typed back, "Save me some. I'll come by this week." She put the phone away. At 1:15, the conference room doors opened and Damien came out with the Hendersons, completing a masterclass in the art of making wealthy people feel seen without giving them anything they hadn't already decided to give. She watched him shake their hands, watched the way Henderson's wife touched Damien's arm briefly, in the way older women sometimes did with men they had decided they approved of. She watched Damien smile, the real one, not the boardroom version, the one that appeared rarely enough that she had started cataloging its appearances. And she thought about the fact that she had known this man for 6 months and still felt like she was standing at the edge of a map that said, "Here there be dragons." After the Hendersons left, Damien came directly to her desk. "Cancel everything after 3, he said, low enough that only she could hear. She looked up. "The site visit, cancel it." She looked at his face. Whatever the 12 hours had started to reveal, some part of it had reached him in the last 3 hours. "All right," she said. "And call your mother," he said. "Tell her you're coming for dinner." Her hands went still on the keyboard. "Why?" "Because I need you both in the same place tonight." The bottom of her stomach dropped approximately 6 inches. She kept her face neutral through long practice. "Damien." "I'll explain at 3, he said. "All of it." He went back through the double doors. Selena sat at her desk and breathed and looked at her calendar and thought about the word both and what it implied about what he'd found in the last 3 hours. And she picked up her phone and called her mother and said she was coming for dinner. And her mother sounded pleased, entirely unaware that the invitation had originated anywhere other than her daughter's ordinary desire for company. She canceled the site visit. She rerouted the afternoon agenda. She answered the emails that needed answering and flagged the ones that didn't. At 2:45, Marcus appeared at her desk. "He's ready," Marcus said. She saved her work. She picked up her notebook because she was not going to sit in that office again without something to write on, something solid to hold on to. She went through the double doors. Damien was at the window again. He had shed the jacket somewhere, which was unusual. She could count on one hand the number of times she had seen him without the jacket during work hours. He looked like a man who had been on the phone for 3 hours, which was almost certainly what he had been doing. There was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there this morning. He turned when she came in. He looked at her for a moment. "Sit down," he said, and then, before she could respond, "Please." She sat. He sat across from her, not behind the desk this time. The chair beside the low table near the window. The informal configuration. She noted it. "Carl Duvane," he said, "is not a brother, not in any biological sense. He's been running with Rourke's crew since they were teenagers. He's the one who handles logistics, the money, the routes, the parts of the operation that require someone who looks like an accountant." She held her notebook without opening it. "What operation?" "Rourke runs protection and loan activity across 4 neighborhoods on the east side. Not sophisticated, but established enough that moving on it directly creates friction with people who have reasons to maintain the status quo." He paused. "He's been at it for 12 years. Your mother's boyfriend is what he is because Rourke made him that way. The violence, the pattern of behavior, it didn't come out of nowhere. That's how Rourke keeps people in line. He cultivates men who control the women around them, because controlled women don't make calls to people like me." Selena was very still. "My mother's boyfriend isn't just—" She stopped. "He's one of 8, Damien said. "That's what we know so far." She sat with that for a moment. 8. 8 women, or more, in the orbit of 8 men, in the orbit of Rourke. A system, not random violence, structured violence. The distinction shouldn't have mattered to the experience of it, but it did. It made her feel something she hadn't expected, which was a cold, clarifying fury. When Rourke's brother came to your mother's building Saturday, Damien said, it wasn't a coincidence. Someone told him about the lock, which means someone in or around that building is connected to the network. The super, Selena said. The word came out flat. Damien looked at her. The building superintendent, she said. He and the boyfriend were friendly. I noticed it, and I didn't think... I thought it was just... She stopped. Her jaw was tight. I thought it was just one of those neighborhood things. It might be. We're looking at it. She looked down at her notebook. She thought about all the times she had walked through her mother's building lobby and nodded to the superintendent, the ordinary social transaction of shared building space, and how the information of that interaction had been moving through a network she hadn't known existed. What does Duvain want? She said. The call this morning. What does back off actually mean to them? It means they know I started asking questions, Damien said, which means the people I asked are connected to them. She looked up sharply, which means they're closer to you than you thought. Yes. She watched him. He wasn't alarmed by this exactly, but he wasn't dismissing it either. He was sitting with it the way he sat with expensive problems, directly, without flinching, calculating costs. Are you in danger? She said. No more than usual. That is not a reassuring answer. Something moved through his expression, almost amusement, but sharper. It's an honest one. She uncapped her pen because she needed to do something with her hands. What's the plan for tonight? I want your mother out of that building, he said. Not permanently. Just for a few days while we remove the superintendent from the equation. She looked at him. Remove. Legally, he said. I have a lawyer and a housing violations report that will take about 4 hours to put together. He'll be out on complaint by Wednesday. And my mother stays where? I have a residence in the East Side District. 3 bedrooms, doorman building, full security on the floor. She'd have her own space. He paused. It's not permanent, but it's safe. Selena sat with this. All of it. The information, the plan, the reality of a man who could deploy lawyers and housing reports and secure residences as casually as she deployed calendar invitations. She sat with the fact that 6 days ago she had told him she didn't accept help because help became debt. And now she was sitting in his office while he dismantled a problem that had been dismantling her for 2 years. My mother is going to ask questions, she said. Tell her it's a short-term relocation while her building has maintenance issues. She doesn't need the whole picture right now. You want me to lie to my mother? I want you to protect her from something she can't do anything about yet, he said. There's a difference. She breathed in and out once, slowly, through her nose. She was not going to tell him he was right. She was also not going to tell him he was wrong, because he wasn't. Fine, she said. Tonight. He nodded. She stood up, because the conversation felt finished, and she needed to be upright, needed the physical sensation of standing on her own feet. One more thing, he said. She turned. Duvain called your personal number, he said. That number isn't associated with this company. It's not in any directory. The only way he has it is from someone who had personal access to your information. She understood immediately. She had understood at the moment of the call, actually, but hadn't wanted to follow the implication to its destination. Someone I know, she said. Someone in your immediate circle. She thought about her immediate circle. It wasn't large. It had never been large. Her mother. 2 women she had worked with at her previous job, who she still occasionally had coffee with. Her landlord. The woman who lived below her in her building and sometimes knocked to ask if she'd seen the mail carrier. She thought about all of them, and she tried to identify which of them could have a connection to a loan and protection operation on the east side, and the math didn't work for any of them. Then she thought about the previous executive assistant at Blackthorn Global. She thought about the woman who had held her position before her, who had left the company just before Selena arrived, under circumstances that she had never been given a clear explanation for and had never pushed to receive. She thought about the fact that she had been placed at Blackthorn Global through an agency she had been referred to by a woman she'd met at a professional development event 9 months ago, a woman whose name she was now reaching for and finding and placing and watching the piece lock into position in a way that made her stomach drop. "The recruiter," she said. "The woman who referred me to the placement agency." Damien went very still. "Her name was Diane Marsh," Selena said. "She was at a networking event. She was the one who told me about the agency." She paused. "I remember thinking it was luck. Good luck. The kind you don't question. Do you have contact information for her?" "I have an email. I don't know if it's still active." She thought about the last time she'd reached out to Diane Marsh, a thank you note 6 weeks into the job. No reply. She had assumed it was just the natural end of a professional referral relationship and moved on without examining it. "Send it to Marcus," Damien said. She went to her desk, found the email address in her sent folder, forwarded it to Marcus's work address, and stood at her desk for a moment looking at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She had been placed here. The thought arranged itself slowly, the way cold moves through a room, not a single event but a gradual permeation. Someone had wanted her in this building, near this man, for a reason that had nothing to do with her skills as an executive assistant, which were real, but which were not, apparently, the primary criterion. She thought about Rourke's network and the women in his orbit and the ways in which control is maintained through proximity. She thought about what she might have been positioned to provide and whether she had provided any of it without knowing. She thought about whether Damien knew she'd been placed here deliberately and whether he had suspected it all along, and whether the coffee and the flowers and the lock and the patience had been something other than what she'd read them to be. She turned and went back through the double doors. He was at his desk now, phone in hand, but he looked up when she came in. "Did you know?" she said. No preamble. "When I was placed here, did you know it wasn't coincidence?" He looked at her for a moment. A long one. "I suspected," he said, "after the first month." The word landed in her chest like something dropped from height. "And you didn't tell me." "I didn't know enough to tell you anything useful," he said. "Suspicion without evidence is just paranoia. I was in this building for 6 months without knowing someone put me here. Yes, someone who wanted me close to you for reasons I didn't choose. Yes." He held her gaze. "I'm sorry. That's not sufficient, but it's what I have." She stood in the middle of the office and felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel clearly. Rage. Not the cold, managed kind she usually deployed. The hot, disorganized kind that sits below the surface until the pressure builds past the point where the surface can hold. "How long have you known about Rourke?" she said. "Longer than I've known about you." "And the connection to my mother's boyfriend?" "That came later, 3 months ago." He set the phone down. "When I understood the connection, I increased the security on your building without telling you, and I understand that was another presumption." "Stop." She held up one hand. "Stop explaining the things you did without telling me and then apologizing for them in sequence. It's making me tired." He stopped. She breathed. In, out. The city went on outside the windows. "I am not a piece on your board," she said. "Whatever Rourke intended when he put me here, I am not a pawn. And whatever you decided I was after, you figured it out. I am not a variable in your calculation." "I know that," he said. "Do you?" "Yes," he said. And it came out with a directness that she hadn't expected. No qualification, no elaboration, just yes, as though the answer were the most straightforward thing in the room. She looked at him. He looked back. The afternoon light through the windows had gone flat and gray, clouds coming in from the west, the kind of light that made everything look like a decision about to be made. "I'll take my mother to the residence tonight," she said. "I'll tell her the maintenance story. I'll stay with her until she's settled." "All right." "And tomorrow," she said, "you're going to tell me everything, not the version you've decided I can handle. Everything." Something in his expression, the slightest shift. If she had to name it, she would have called it respect, the specific kind that comes from being surprised in a way you didn't anticipate. "Tomorrow," he said, "everything." She left. She went back to her desk, finished the workday with the same mechanical precision, and at 5:15 she took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the heavy pre-storm air and called her mother and said she was coming for dinner, like she always did, like nothing had changed. Her mother met her at the door with soup and the uncomplicated warmth of a woman who loved her daughter without complicated conditions. And Selena sat at her mother's kitchen table and ate soup and talked about nothing and watched her mother move around the small kitchen and thought, "You have been inside something much larger than either of us knew, and you don't know it. And tonight I'm going to move you and you'll think it's about plumbing." She stayed for an hour. She told her mother about the maintenance issue, water pressure in the building, a repair that would take a few days, a friend who had a spare apartment. Her mother raised her eyebrows. A friend? Selena said yes, a work connection, very straightforward. Please don't make it complicated. Her mother packed a bag. Selena called Marcus, who sent a car. They rode across town in the back seat of a black sedan, her mother looking out the window at the neighborhood sliding past, and Selena sat beside her and watched her face and thought about all the years of this woman absorbing things she shouldn't have had to absorb, surviving things in small ways that never looked like survival from the outside, but were. The residence was on the 9th floor of a building that communicated safety with the quiet confidence of a space designed by someone who understood the difference between security theater and actual security. Good locks, a front desk that required actual identification, hallways with adequate lighting. Her mother's temporary apartment was clean and furnished and had a window that looked out over a courtyard with a small garden. Her mother stood in the window and looked at the garden and said, "This is a lot for a plumbing issue." "The building is very thorough," Selena said. Her mother turned and looked at her with the specific expression she had been deploying since Selena was 7 years old. The one that said, "I know you're managing me and I'm choosing to let you." "Are you okay?" her mother said. "Yes," Selena said. "Are you sure?" "I'm working on it," Selena said, which was the honest version of yes. Her mother crossed the room and hugged her, which she did sometimes without warning, the sudden uncomplicated physical fact of it, and Selena stood in the middle of the safe apartment that Damien Blackthorne had provided and let herself be held by her mother for a moment. Just that, just the simple weight of someone who loved her with no conditions attached. Then she went home. She rode the subway back across the city and sat in the familiar rattle and fluorescent hum of the late evening car, and she thought about everything she had learned today, and she thought about the woman named Diane Marsh, who had handed her a business card at a networking event and changed the direction of her life. And she thought about which direction Selena Vale's life was supposed to have gone as a result. She walked the 2 blocks from the subway to her building in the thick pre-storm air, the sky pressing down yellow-green and wrong, the way it gets before the weather breaks. She let herself in. She climbed the stairs because the elevator in her building was unreliable, and she had never wanted to be unreliable elevator dependent when she needed to leave quickly, an old habit, predating this building, predating most things. She unlocked her apartment door. She pushed it open and stopped. The overhead light was on. She had not left the overhead light on. And sitting in the chair by the window, her chair, in her apartment, in her space, which had 3 locks on the door and a chain she always used, was a woman she hadn't seen in 9 months. A woman with sharp, careful eyes, and the particular posture of someone who had been waiting for exactly long enough to make a point. Diane Marsh looked at her and said, "Close the door, Selena. We need to talk before your boss decides tonight is the night to move." The storm broke outside. Rain hit the window like a fist, and Selena Vale stood in the doorway of her own apartment and understood, with the cold clarity of a woman who had survived by reading rooms, that she was standing at the edge of something she could no longer step back from. Selena stepped inside and closed the door. She did it the way she did most things that frightened her, without hesitation, because hesitation was just fear given permission to spread, and she had stopped giving fear that kind of permission a long time ago. The deadbolt clicked behind her, the chain she always used. Both locks engaged, the automatic muscle memory of a woman who had spent years making sure she could not be followed in. Then she turned and looked at Diane Marsh sitting in her chair and thought very carefully about everything she was not going to do in the next 60 seconds. She was not going to ask how Diane had gotten in because the answer was either a picked lock or a copied key, and either answer told her the same thing about what kind of woman Diane Marsh actually was. She was not going to reach for her phone immediately because Diane would have anticipated that, and there was information in this room that she needed before she made any calls. She was not going to show the fear that was moving through her body right now like electricity through a wire, cold and fast and buzzing at the base of her spine in the way that fear did when it came from a genuine source rather than an anticipated one. She set her bag down on the floor near the door, within reach, and she crossed her arms and looked at Diane Marsh and said, "How long have you been in my apartment?" 2 hours, Diane said. She was dressed simply, dark clothes, no jewelry, and her hands were resting in her lap with the deliberate stillness of someone who had practiced looking unthreatening. She was not unthreatening. She had never been unthreatening. Selena understood now that she had missed that because she had been looking for a different shape of threat. 2 hours, Selena said, and you waited. I needed you to come home alone. Diane glanced at the window. Rain was sheeting against the glass now, the storm fully arrived, the kind of city rain that made the streets below sound like static. I needed to talk to you before things move any further. You said that already. Selena moved to the kitchen counter and stood against it, putting 5 feet of space between herself and Diane without making it look like retreat. Talk. Diane looked at her with those sharp, careful eyes and said, Damian Blackthorne is going to get your mother killed. The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Selena kept her face exactly as still as she needed it to be. Explain that. Rourke knows about the residence, Diane said. The building you moved her to tonight. He knew about it before you got there. Someone on Blackthorne's security team, she paused, is not on Blackthorne's side. The cold moved through Selena's chest slowly, spreading outward. You're saying there's someone inside his operation, she said. I'm saying there has been for 18 months. Diane shifted in the chair, forward slightly, elbows on knees. That's how Rourke knew when to call you this morning. That's how he knew Blackthorne had started asking questions. He heard it from inside the room. Selena breathed. Why are you telling me this? Because I made a mistake, Diane said simply. And I don't have a lot of time left to fix it. Selena looked at her, looked at the lines around her eyes that she hadn't noticed 9 months ago at a networking event, or hadn't registered as what they were. Not age lines, not stress lines, but the specific carving that happens to faces that have been afraid for a sustained, extended period. You placed me at Blackthorne Global, Selena said. Yes. For Rourke. A pause. Yes. What was I supposed to do? Selena kept her voice even. What was the plan? Diane looked at her hands. Access, just access. Rourke wanted visibility into Blackthorne's schedule, his meetings, his travel. Nothing that required you to do anything active. Just be in the room. Be near enough that information could flow. You used me as a surveillance asset, Selena said, without my knowledge. Yes. In an operation against a man who has been actively dismantling the network that has been hurting my mother. Diane's jaw tightened. I didn't know about your mother when I placed you. I didn't know the connection. Rourke doesn't brief his people comprehensively. He tells you what he needs you to know and nothing more. I didn't find out about the boyfriend until 4 months after you started the job. And then? Selena said. And then I had a problem. Diane looked up. Because I had put a woman inside the orbit of the one man who might actually be able to help her. And I had done it for the man who was hurting her, and there was no clean way out of that. Selena stood against her kitchen counter and let the weight of that settle. She let herself feel the full dimensions of it. The recruitment at a networking event that had seemed like luck, the placement that had seemed like opportunity, the 6 months of work inside that building that she had believed were her own choices made on her own terms. And underneath all of it, the invisible scaffolding of someone else's plan that she had been walking inside without seeing the walls. You should have told me, Selena said. I know. 9 months ago, or 6 months ago, or 3 months ago when you found out about my mother. I know. Diane's voice was flat with self-recrimination. I was afraid. Rourke doesn't release people. Once you're in his network, the exit requires things that I wasn't... She stopped. I was afraid of what would happen to me. And now you're more afraid of something else, Selena said. That's the only reason people like you come forward, not conscience, fear of a worse outcome. Diane didn't argue with it. What changed? Selena said. Tonight. What made tonight the night you broke in and waited 2 hours in my apartment? Diane was quiet for a moment. Rourke is moving up his timeline, whatever Blackthorne has been doing to disrupt the network. It's working faster than Rourke anticipated. He's losing pieces. The superintendent in your mother's building was one of them, and when Blackthorne's lawyers moved on him today, Rourke took it as a declaration. She paused. He's going to use your mother tonight. The word tonight went through Selena like a blade. Use her how? she said. As leverage, Diane said. Not violence, not yet. A demonstration that Blackthorn can't protect the things he's decided to protect. Rourke knows about the residence. That's what I told you. He knows where she is. And he has someone inside Blackthorn's security team who can make the protection disappear at a specific moment. Selena pushed off from the counter. She picked up her bag from the floor. Diane said, "Don't call Blackthorn." Selena stopped. Why not? Because the person inside his team monitors his communications. Diane stood up. Any call you make to Blackthorn about your mother's location is a call that tells Rourke you know. And if Rourke knows you know, the timeline accelerates further. Selena stood in the middle of her apartment with her bag in her hand, and the rain against the windows, and the cold, clear understanding that she was in a room with a woman who might be telling her the truth and might be delivering her into the hands of the people who wanted her most neutralized. And the two possibilities were indistinguishable from each other without information she didn't have. She looked at Diane Marsh and said, "Prove it." Diane reached into her jacket and produced a phone. Not her own phone. A cheap device, prepaid, the kind you buy with cash. She held it out. Selena crossed the room and took it. On the screen was a text thread. She scrolled through it slowly, reading. The language was abbreviated, coded in the way that people who think they're being careful develop their own shorthand, and she read through the gaps the way she read everything, inferring the shape of what was being communicated from the negative space around the words. Package relocated east. Confirm new address. Confirmed. 9th floor doorman. Window? Tomorrow 0200. Team in place. Damage or retrieve? Retrieve? Clean. She looked up from the phone. Retrieve, she said. They want to take her. And hold her, Diane said, until Blackthorn backs down completely. Selena looked back at the thread. The timestamp on the last message was 40 minutes ago, while she was on the subway. While she was riding home through the rain thinking she had managed something tonight, moved a piece to safety, done something that mattered. Who is the contact inside his team, she said. I don't know his name. I've never been given names. Rourke runs it in cells. Each person knows only the person above and below them. It's what makes him hard to dismantle. Selena set the phone on the counter. She looked at the wall above the sink for a moment, the small crack in the plaster near the corner that had been there since she moved in. She had meant to report it to the landlord and never had. She thought about Marcus. Marcus, who had been her shadow for 3 months. Marcus, who she had read as reliable, as safe, as one of the few people in this situation whose positioning she had trusted. She thought about the 12 other people on Damien's security team, whose names she knew from schedules and briefings, and the ordinary administrative texture of her work. She thought about this fact that she could not call Damien, could not use the communication channels she trusted, could not move through the structures she had started to lean on, however reluctantly, without potentially triggering the very thing she was trying to prevent. She thought about what that left. What do you want? She said to Diane. You didn't come here to do me a favor. What do you want from me in exchange for this information? Diane looked at her steadily. I want out, she said. Whatever Blackthorn is building, the legal case, the financial pressure, whatever he's assembling against Rourke's network, I want to be out of it. Not prosecuted, not named, out. I can't promise that, Selena said. I have no authority to promise that. But Blackthorn does. I can't contact Blackthorn. You can find a way to contact him that doesn't go through his team, Diane said. You're smart enough to figure out how. You've been managing that man's entire operation for 6 months. You know how he communicates, how he moves, what channels he uses when he needs something not to be on the record. She paused. Get me his word that I'm out, and I'll give you the name. Selena looked at her. You do have the name. Diane didn't answer, which was the same as yes. You held it back, Selena said. Smart. I've been surviving Rourke's network for 3 years. I learned from the best. Selena picked up her own phone. She did not call Damien. She opened the calendar application, which was synced to the work system, and she navigated through it with a specific sequence of actions that she had discovered 6 weeks ago when she was setting up a redundant backup for the Foundation's event scheduling. A back channel, effectively, a secondary notification pathway that ran through the Foundation's systems rather than Blackthorn Global's main communications infrastructure. She had never used it for anything personal. She had noted its existence and filed it away, the way she filed everything that might matter later. She opened it now and typed a message that said, I need you to see something. Not through the usual channels. Find a way. She sent it to the Foundation system address associated with Damien's private account. She put her phone in her bag. If he responds, she said to Diane, you'll have your answer within the hour. If he doesn't, he'll respond, Diane said. He watches those channels. He watches everything. They waited. The rain continued. Selena stood at her kitchen counter and did not sit down because sitting felt too much like settling in, and she did not want to settle in. She wanted to be upright and ready. She watched the minutes move on the clock above the stove with the granular awareness of someone tracking a deadline. At 11:47, her phone buzzed. A calendar notification from the Foundation system. A new event added to her personal schedule set for 12:15 at an address in the Meridian District, 3 blocks from her apartment building. No name, no explanation, just the address and the time. She showed it to Diane. Diane looked at it and said, "Go." "I'm not leaving you in my apartment," Selena said. Diane smiled, thin and humorless. "Fair enough." They went out together into the rain, and Selena walked with her bag over one shoulder and her phone in her hand and Diane 2 steps behind her. And she thought about everything that needed to happen in the next 2 hours, and the specific narrow path through which it needed to happen, and she breathed the wet city air and kept moving. The address was a side entrance to a building she recognized, a mixed-use property that the Blackthorn Foundation used as office space for some of its program staff. She had been here twice. She knew the layout well enough. Damien was already inside. He was standing in the small lobby with his jacket on and his phone in his hand, and the look on his face when she came through the door with Diane Marsh 2 steps behind her was the most completely unguarded thing she had ever seen on him. A fraction of a second where surprise and calculation and something harder to name all moved across his face simultaneously before the control came back. He looked at Diane. His jaw tightened by approximately 2 millimeters. "Who is she?" he said to Selena. "The woman who placed me in your building," Selena said. "She also knows your team has been compromised, and she has the name." Damien looked at Diane for a long moment. The lobby was small and poorly lit, and the rain was audible through the door behind them, and the 3 of them stood in a triangle that felt like the compressed version of everything that had been building for months. "Speak," he said to Diane. Diane told him. All of it. The placement, the network, the cell structure, the communication she had intercepted, the text thread about the residents, the timeline. She told it efficiently, without decoration, the practiced delivery of someone who had rehearsed this confession and understood that its value decreased with every additional word. Damien listened without moving. When she finished, he said, "What do you want?" "Out," Diane said. "Whatever you're building against Rourke, I want to not be in it. Define out. No prosecution, no named testimony. I disappear from the picture completely." Damien looked at her for a long moment. Selena watched his face and tried to read what was happening behind it, and she could see the calculation, the assessment of Diane's value, the weight of what she was offering against what she was asking, the longer game implications of making a promise to someone who was, at bottom, a person who had participated willingly in a network that had damaged people Selena cared about. "I can offer you quiet," he said finally, "not immunity. I don't control prosecution, but what I can do is make sure the case we build doesn't require your name in it. If you give me what I need, there's no reason for you to be visible." Diane looked at him steadily. "Your word." "My word." Diane looked at Selena. Selena held her gaze and said nothing, because she was not going to co-sign this on Diane's behalf, and Diane knew it, and that was fine. This was Diane's decision to make with the information she had. Diane looked back at Damien. "The man inside your team," she said. "His name is Ellis. First name, no last. That's all I have. He works night security rotation. He's been with your company 14 months. He was Rourke's placement, not a turned asset. He came in clean and has been feeding information since day 1. Damien's phone was in his hand before she finished the sentence. He typed something, sent it, put the phone in his jacket pocket. "Ellis Crane," he said 3 seconds later. "Night rotation supervisor, 14 months. He looked up, and the thing in his face now was the controlled fury of a man who had just understood the shape of a betrayal and was deciding exactly how to hold it. "He's on shift right now." Selena's stomach clenched. "He's there right now? In the building with the residents?" He's at my main security hub, Damien said, which means he has visibility on every camera feed from every building under my protection. He looked at her directly, including your mother's building. They were out the door in under 30 seconds. Damien moved fast when he moved. The unhurried quality disappeared completely, and what was underneath it was something more efficient and considerably more alarming. Selena kept pace. Diane came with them because there was nowhere else for her to be, and all three of them were in the back of the car Damien had waiting before the rain had fully soaked through Selena's jacket. He was on the phone the entire ride. She listened to the half of the conversation she could hear and constructed the other half from context. He was pulling Ellis Crane from the security hub on a pretense, a manufactured infrastructure alert that would require hands-on attention at a different location. He was also, simultaneously, alerting the two people at her mother's building to the specific threat through a channel that did not run through the hub. He was doing 5 things at once, and none of them were visible on his face, except as a kind of intensity, a total investment of attention that she had seen him deploy in boardrooms and had understood intellectually was impressive, and now understood physically, in her body, as something else. He ended a call and looked at her. "She's fine," he said. "They have eyes on her room. She's asleep." Selena released a breath she had been holding since she'd read the word retrieve on Diane's phone. "Ellis," she said. "What happens to him?" "He's on his way to a location where he'll answer questions," Damien said. "After that, it depends on what he tells us." "You mean someone is going to interrogate him?" "Yes." "Legally?" "A beat. Comprehensively." She looked out the window at the rain-soaked streets. "And Rourke? When he finds out his inside man has been pulled—" "He already knows," Diane said from the other side of the back seat. She had been quiet since the lobby. "The moment Ellis went dark, Rourke's system flagged it. He has fail-safes everywhere." Damien's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression changed by a fraction, and that fraction was enough. "What?" Selena said. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a message. 4 words from a number that ran to a dead end when you tried to trace it. 4 words that rearranged everything she thought she understood about the shape of tonight. "I have the mother." The car stopped at a red light. The rain hit the roof. Nobody spoke. Selena looked at the 4 words on the screen and felt the world reorganize itself around their meaning. She had moved her mother. She had done it carefully. She had done it tonight, specifically, so that her mother would be out of reach of the threat. She had done it with Damien's resources and Damien's planning and every piece of information she had available. And it had been wrong. Not the destination. The destination had been right. The residence was right. The 2 people watching the room were right. It had been wrong somewhere else. Some other piece, some gap in the architecture that she hadn't seen. "Diane," Damien said very quietly, "is there a second team?" Diane's face had gone the color of paper. I didn't know, Is there a second team?" he said again, same volume, same complete absence of pressure in his voice, which was somehow more frightening than shouting. "That you didn't tell us about." "Rourke runs cells," Diane said. "I told you, I only know my cell. I don't know what other cells are active." She was gripping her own hands in her lap. "I told you everything I knew. I swear to you I told you everything." "Selena," Damien said. She looked at him. She had been staring at the phone, at the 4 words, and she pulled her eyes up to his face. "I need you to stay in this car," he said. "No," she said. "Selena, no." She said it the same way he said her name. Quiet, total, not a negotiating position. "She's my mother. You don't get to manage this one." He looked at her for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, she saw him calculate and reject approximately 4 responses before he arrived at the one he actually gave, which was, "Then stay beside me and do exactly what I tell you when I tell you." "Agreed," she said. The car started moving again. She sat back against the seat and looked at the dark, wet city outside the window and thought about her mother asleep in a room that had seemed safe, and the 2 people watching the door who had apparently not been watching the right door, and the way the entire careful structure of the evening had been built on a foundation that included a crack she had not seen. She thought about Carl Duvane's call this morning. "Tell your boss to back off." She thought about how the call had felt like a warning and how she had treated it as a warning, and how it had also been a distraction. Something to focus their attention while the real move was being prepared somewhere else. She thought about herself sitting in Damien's office, telling him everything, both of them building a response to the threat they could see, and Rourke building something else entirely in the negative space of their attention. She thought about how long she had survived by being the person in the room who saw the most, and how tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had been outplayed. The car turned onto a side street she didn't recognize immediately, and Damien was on the phone again, and Diane was sitting very still with her hands in her lap, and Selena sat between both of them and felt something happening inside her chest that was different from the fear she was used to carrying. It was colder than fear, more precise. The thing that comes after fear when fear realizes it is no longer sufficient. The hardening of something that had previously been soft. The decision that happens below the level of conscious thought. The moment when a person who has spent their entire life surviving on the defensive understands that defense alone is no longer enough. Her mother was somewhere in this city. Someone had her. And Selena Vale, who had spent 30 years learning to disappear and endure and wait for things to pass, felt the last soft remnant of that strategy dissolve. Because some things you do not wait out, some things you walk directly into. And for the first time in her life, she was not going to walk in alone. She looked at Damien, who was still on the phone, who was organizing a response to something she didn't fully understand yet, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this before, and she felt the full weight of what it meant to need someone. Not as a weakness, not as a debt, but as the simple, unavoidable arithmetic of a situation too large for one person to hold. She put her hand on his arm. He stopped mid-sentence. He looked at her. "Find her," Selena said. Something crossed his face that she had never seen there before. Not the calculating assessment, not the careful neutrality. Something raw and direct and entirely without the armor he wore everywhere else. "I will," he said. And the car moved through the rain toward whatever came next, and Selena held on to the certainty in those two words the way you hold on to the only solid thing in a collapsing room, with everything you have. Because the car stopped. Not at a destination, not at a planned location. It stopped because the vehicle 2 cars ahead of them had pulled sideways across the narrow street, blocking both lanes, and the headlights of a 3rd car behind them were now filling the rear window with white light. And Damien said one word to his driver that Selena had never heard him say before. Out. They moved. All 4 of them, Damien, Selena, Diane, and the driver, out of the car into the rain in under 4 seconds. And the driver was already putting himself between Damien and the car behind them. And Marcus materialized from somewhere that Selena could not account for because she had not seen him in the vehicle, had not known he was following, and the specific relief of seeing his face lasted approximately 1 second before the sound started. Not gunshots. An engine. A door. Footsteps. 2 men from the car ahead, 1 from the blocking vehicle behind. They moved with the coordinated economy of people who had done this before, and they were not pointing weapons, which was somehow more frightening than if they had been, because the absence of weapons meant this was a conversation. And conversations at midnight in a blocked street in the rain were not conversations she wanted to have. The man in front was built wide and moved like someone who had been hit many times and had long since stopped finding it instructive. He stopped 6 feet from Damien and looked at him with the flat professional regard of a man delivering a message rather than starting a fight. "Mr. Rourke would like a word," he said. Damien stood in the rain with his jacket getting wet and his hands at his sides, and he looked at the man with the absolute stillness that Selena had come to understand as his most dangerous register. "Where?" Damien said. "Close." The man glanced at Selena. "Just you?" "No," Damien said. Mr. Rourke was specific. "I don't negotiate without her," Damien said. "Those are my terms. Take them back." The man looked at him for a moment. He had a phone in his hand and he raised it to his ear and said something in a low voice that Selena couldn't hear over the rain, and he listened, and he lowered the phone and looked back at Damien. "Both," he said. "Fine." Selena looked at Damien. He looked back at her. His expression was doing something she had never seen it do before, asking her, not telling, not deciding for her, asking. She gave him the smallest nod. They followed. The destination was 4 blocks away, a restaurant that had closed 2 hours ago, lights off in the front windows, a single bulb burning in the back. The man led them through a side entrance and down a short hallway that smelled like cooking oil and cleaning solution, and the particular closeness of a small room recently occupied by many people. Rourke was at a table in the back. She had built a picture of him from context, from the shape of what he'd built, from the behavior of the people around him, from the specific quality of fear his name produced in Diane Marsh's voice. She had expected something that matched the scale of the damage he'd caused, and he did not match it. He was 60, maybe, with a neat gray beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the kind of unremarkable face that disappeared in crowds. He was drinking coffee. He had the newspaper folded on the table beside him. He looked like someone's grandfather. He looked at Selena first, then at Damien. He gestured at the chairs across from him. "Sit," he said. Neither of them sat. Rourke smiled faintly. "Your mother is safe," he said to Selena. "I want to be clear about that. She's comfortable. She's not frightened. She doesn't know anything is wrong. I'm not in the business of hurting old women. It's bad for business, and it's not something I enjoy." "Where is she?" Selena said. "Close," he said. The same word his man had used. Rourke seemed to like the word. "She'll be home by morning if this conversation goes the way I hope it will." He looked at Damien. "Sit down, Damien. I've known you since you were 22 years old. Sit down and we'll talk like adults." Selena looked at Damien. Something passed through his face, a history she wasn't part of, a texture to the relationship between these two men that the word known only partially covered. He sat. She sat beside him. "You've been dismantling my operation," Rourke said to Damien. "Conversational. No heat in it. For the better part of 4 months. Quietly. Which I respect. The housing complaints, the financial audits, the legal pressure on 3 of my business fronts. Careful work. Expensive work." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "What I want to know is why. We've had an understanding for 6 years. You stay in your territory. I stay in mine." "Your territory expanded," Damien said. "Into what?" "Into people I consider mine to protect." Rourke looked at Selena. "Her." "Her mother," Damien said, "and the 7 other women attached to your network, and the specific pattern of how you maintain control in those households." He paused. "That's not a territory question. That's a line." Rourke was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee, set it back down. "I didn't know about her when the placement happened. The placement was operational. I needed visibility on you. Your people identified her as a viable placement 6 months before she walked into your building, based on her skill profile and her financial situation. The fact that her mother was in my network's orbit was a coincidence I didn't know about until it was already done." "I don't care about coincidences," Damien said. "I care about what you're doing now." "What I'm doing now," Rourke said, "is trying to prevent an escalation that hurts people on both sides. Pulling Ellis, yes, I know, you found him within 2 hours, which is impressive. Pulling him triggered a response I had in place. The response was proportional. The woman is safe and comfortable and doesn't know she's anywhere other than a friend's home. Release her," Damien said, "tonight, and we talk about what comes next." "What comes next," Rourke said, "is the question." He leaned back. "You've cost me 4 months of work and 2 viable business fronts. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't require a response, but I'm also 60 years old and I have no interest in a direct conflict with you. It would be expensive and exhausting, and the outcome is not certain for either of us." "It's certain for me," Damien said. "Men who are certain about outcomes are the ones who lose them," Rourke said, and there was no malice in it, just the flat conviction of someone who had survived long enough to have data. He looked at Selena again. "What is she to you, specifically?" Damien said, "That's not relevant to this conversation." "It's entirely relevant, because if she's an employee, I release her mother and we negotiate a settlement and everyone goes home. If she's something else," Rourke tilted his head slightly, "then this conversation is about something different, and I need to know which conversation we're having." Silence. The rain was audible even in here, beating on the roof above them, running down the windows at the front of the dark restaurant. Selena kept her eyes on Rourke. She felt Damien shift slightly beside her. Not much, just the small muscular adjustment of a man making a decision. And then he said, "She's not a negotiating point. She's not a variable. She's not something I'll bargain about." Rourke looked at him for a long moment. "All right," he said quietly. Then we understand each other. He reached inside his jacket. Marcus moved from his position near the door, fast, hand going to his side. And Rourke raised his other hand, palm out, unhurried. Easy. He produced a phone, placed it on the table, slid it across to Damien. The address where she's being kept. My word that she's unharmed. You can have your people there in 10 minutes. Damien looked at the phone. He didn't touch it. What do you want? He said. I want you to stop, Rourke said. The financial pressure, the legal fronts, the audits. I want 6 months of quiet. In exchange for one woman's safety, Damien said. No. Rourke blinked, slowly. The kind of blink that wasn't actually a blink, but a recalibration. You're negotiating against a woman's safety. I'm telling you, I don't accept the premise, Damien said. You don't release her as a trade. You release her because I am telling you to. And then we negotiate. The temperature in the room changed. Selina felt it. The shift from the tense but contained quality of the last 10 minutes to something more acute. Rourke's 2 men near the wall straightened by a fraction. Marcus was very still near the door. Rourke looked at Damien for a long time. He looked at him the way you look at a problem you've done the math on 3 times and keep getting the same uncomfortable answer. Then he picked up his own phone and made a call. Release her, he said. Front door, car waiting. He paused. Now. He ended the call. He looked at Damien. She's being walked out as we speak. You can confirm with your people in 2 minutes. He folded his hands on the table. Now, you said we negotiate. What followed was the most compressed 40 minutes of Selina's life, and she had lived through some compression. She sat at the table in the back of the dark restaurant, and she listened to 2 men negotiate the terms of a ceasefire, the way you'd listen to 2 surgeons discussing a procedure. Clinical, technical, the language of it stripped of the emotional weight that the subject matter deserved, because emotional weight was a luxury that people in their positions couldn't afford at a table. Damien did not give Rourke quiet. He gave him time, a structured wind-down, a negotiated dismantling of the specific parts of Rourke's network that directly enabled the pattern of domestic control that had put his people in her mother's building. Financial withdrawal, relocation of specific personnel. An agreement, structured as carefully as any contract, that the 8 men currently positioned as Rourke's instruments of household control would be removed from those positions over a 60-day period. Rourke negotiated every point. He was not, Selina observed, a stupid man. He was not even, in the specific technical sense, a cruel man. He was a man who had built a system that used cruelty as a maintenance mechanism, which was worse than being personally cruel because it meant the cruelty was structural, self-perpetuating, not dependent on his individual choices. She sat through the negotiation and said nothing because she understood that her speaking in this room changed the dynamic in ways that were unpredictable, and she was not going to be unpredictable tonight. Her phone buzzed. A message from the number that had sent Damien the 2 cars waiting notification. 1 sentence. She's out. Car confirmed. Heading to the residence. Selina exhaled. She put her phone back in her bag and sat up straight and thought, all right, she's safe. Now finish this. At 1:40 in the morning, Rourke sat back and said, 60 days. The terms you've outlined. And your legal activity stops. My legal activity stops when the 60 days are complete and the terms are met, Damien said. Not before. You don't trust my word. I trust your word exactly as much as the situation warrants, Damien said. The terms include verification. That's not distrust, that's contract. Rourke looked at him. Something in the older man's expression, not quite respect, but adjacent to it. The specific quality of regard that emerges between people who understand each other's capacities even when they're on opposing sides. Fine, Rourke said. One more thing, Damien said. Diane Marsh, she's out. Rourke's expression didn't change. Marsh made her choices. She did, Damien said. And the choice she made tonight is one I'm choosing to reward. She's out of your network. You don't contact her. You don't use her. You don't remind her that she was ever in it. She knows things. She knows things I now also know, Damien said. So her knowledge is no longer leverage. She's just a person. Let her be one. Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then, Marsh is out. They stood up. The men near the wall shifted but didn't move. Rourke remained at the table, hands around his coffee cup, looking like someone's grandfather again, the ordinariness of him unchanged by everything that had just happened. At the door, he said, "Damien." Damien stopped without turning. "She's going to change you," Rourke said. "Not unkindly. They always do, the ones that matter. The question is whether you change into something better or something worse." Damien said nothing. They walked out into the rain. The car was there. Marcus was on his phone in a low, rapid conversation with someone on the other end of a serious logistics problem. Diane was standing under the narrow overhang of the building's side entrance, looking like a woman who had just survived something she wasn't sure she deserved to survive. Selena stopped in front of her. "You're out," she said. He agreed. Diane closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, the careful blankness was still there, but something beneath it had shifted. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Selena said. "Thank yourself by staying out." She paused. "And don't place any more women in buildings without their knowledge, whatever form that takes next." "It won't," Diane said simply. Selena got in the car. They drove toward the residence, toward her mother, through the rain-soaked city, and Selena sat with the exhaustion of the evening settling into her body now that the acute edge of it was over. The bone-deep tiredness that comes when adrenaline withdraws and leaves the body to account for everything it's been through. She became aware, gradually, that Damien was watching her. She looked at him. "What?" she said. "You're shaking," he said. She looked at her hands. They were. Slightly. With the fine tremor of a body processing what the mind had already filed away. She pressed them flat on her thighs. "I'm fine," she said. "I know you're fine," he said. "You can still be shaking." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away at the city outside the window, at the rain still falling, at the ordinary lights of a city that had no idea what had just happened inside it. "She's safe," she said. "Yes. And the terms? 60 days? You'll verify?" "Selena." She stopped. "She's safe," he said again. "Take a breath." She took a breath. It came out less steady than she would have liked. She pressed her hands harder against her thighs and breathed again, and felt the shaking slow by degrees. "He knew you," she said. "Rourke. He said he'd known you since you were 22. Damien was quiet for a moment. "He gave me my first contract, before Blackthorn Global existed, before anything I have now existed. I was 22 years old and I had a skill set and no legal outlet for it, and he paid me to use it." She turned to look at him. He was watching the road ahead. "What kind of contract?" she said. "The kind that I spent the next 8 years getting clean of," he said. "The Blackthorn Foundation isn't philanthropy for its own sake. It's what I built so that what I do now is nothing like what I did then." He paused. "I was Rourke at one point, a younger, less organized version. I know exactly what his network does and how it does it because I was inside one like it." She sat with this. She thought about all the ways she had read him. The controlled violence beneath the suits, the way rooms reorganized around his presence, the quality of fear his name produced. She thought about what it meant to know something like that about a person, and whether it changed anything. She decided it didn't, not because it wasn't significant, because she had spent her whole life being defined by the worst things that had happened in and around her, and she had made a decision at some point, not consciously, not clearly, but definitively, that she was not going to do that to other people. "Does it matter to you?" he said. "What I told you?" "Yes," she said. "It matters." She held his gaze. "It doesn't change anything." Something crossed his face. That fraction of a second again, the unguarded thing, before the control came back. He looked at her with the full weight of it, and she looked back, and the car moved through the rain, and the city went on existing around them. Her mother was in the lobby of the residence when they arrived, wrapped in a bathrobe over her clothes, sitting in one of the lobby chairs with a cup of tea and the alert, watchful expression of a woman who had been told she was being walked home for undisclosed reasons and was compiling her own theory of the evening. Selena came through the door, and her mother looked at her and then at Damien behind her and said nothing for a moment, just looked, with the particular acuity of a woman who had spent decades reading rooms out of necessity. "You're both soaking wet," her mother said. "We're fine," Selena said. Her mother stood up and crossed the lobby and looked at her daughter with those eyes that had always seen more than Selena wanted to show, and she reached up and touched Selena's face briefly, the way she had done since Selena was a child. The specific gesture that meant I see you, specifically you, not the version of you performing okay. Tell me tomorrow, her mother said quietly. Tonight, just sit down. They sat in the lobby, the three of them, while the rain came down outside and the night moved toward morning. Her mother asked Damien 3 questions, the way she asked everyone 3 questions the first time she met them, her system for calibrating a person. What he did, what he cared about, what he regretted. He answered all 3 without hesitation. The third one, she watched him with an expression that Selena recognized as her mother's version of arriving at a conclusion. When her mother finally went back upstairs, Selena walked with her to the elevator and waited until the doors closed and then stood in the elevator lobby for a moment with her back against the wall. She thought about everything that had happened in the last 18 hours, beginning with Diane Marsh in her chair, and ending with her mother in a bathrobe asking a dangerous man what he regretted. She thought about the specific alchemy of it, how a day that had started with threat and surveillance and a text thread about retrieval had ended with all 3 of them sitting in lobby chairs while her mother dispensed tea and judgment in equal measure. She went back to the lobby. Damien was standing near the window, looking at the rain, his jacket still damp, his phone in his hand but not active. He looked for the first time in 6 months of proximity like a man who was tired, not physically diminished, just present in his exhaustion rather than armored against it. She crossed the lobby and stood beside him. Go home, she said. When you do, he said, I'm staying here tonight. Then I'm staying here tonight. She turned to look at him. Damien. Selena. She held his gaze and thought about everything she wanted to say, and everything she had spent 6 months not saying, and the specific inadequacy of words for the shape of what the last 18 hours had been. Thank you, she said finally. He looked at her for a moment. Don't. Don't what? Thank me, he said. Not for this. This isn't something I did for gratitude. What did you do it for? He held her gaze with the full weight of that attention, the thing that registered in the chest before the brain caught up. The something she had spent 6 months telling herself was professional, was calculated, was the product of a man who noticed everything and filed everything and used everything, and had spent the last several weeks understanding was none of those things. You know what I did it for, he said. She looked at him. She thought about 6 months of coffee she hadn't asked for, and protection she hadn't accepted, and patience she had never encountered in any man before him. She thought about the man who had sat on the floor outside her couch at 1 a.m. because he didn't want her to be alone, which she hadn't known about yet, but somehow already felt the shape of. She thought about a man who had told Rourke, without hesitation, that she was not a negotiating point. She thought about all the careful architecture she had built around the idea of not trusting men who offered to help. She thought about how some architecture doesn't hold not because it was poorly built, but because the thing it was built against turned out to be something different from what it was designed to resist. I know, she said quietly. They stood at the window together and watched the rain thin slightly, the storm beginning its slow withdrawal from the city, and she was aware of the exact distance between them, 6 inches, less, and the specific quality of that distance, which was not the professional distance she had maintained for 6 months, but something entirely different. He moved first, not toward her. He shifted so that they were side by side rather than angled, shoulders almost touching, both of them looking out at the rain-wet street. And he said nothing, and she said nothing, and they stood there in the lobby of the safe building while the storm moved on outside. She felt his hand, not grasping, not urgent, just the backs of his fingers against the backs of hers, a question asked in the smallest possible physical register, so small it could be walked back from in a second if she needed it to be. She turned her hand over. He laced his fingers through hers. She looked at the window. She breathed. Everything that had been building for 6 months, the coffee and the patience and the lock and the flowers and the man who had chosen restraint because of her, and the man who had said she's not a negotiating point in a room where he had every reason to use her as one, all of it was present in the lobby with them, and she held his hand and she thought, all right, all right. Outside, the rain was almost done. The street below reflected streetlights and long gold ribbons across the wet pavement. A cab went by. A cyclist, improbably, in the drizzle. The city, ordinary and ongoing, indifferent to the fact that something had just happened inside it that she would spend years trying to articulate. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. The something in his face, the thing she had been cataloging and analyzing and explaining away for 6 months, was fully present now, uncovered. No armor, just the direct specific thing itself. She felt it land in her chest the way she felt everything about him. Before the brain caught up, in the body first. She thought, I'm ready. And then the lobby lights flickered. Both of them went still simultaneously. The lights steadied, but the phone in Damien's jacket, the work phone, the one connected to his security infrastructure, buzzed in 3 rapid pulses that she had never heard it do before. He pulled it out. He looked at the screen. His hand tightened on hers. What? She said. He showed her the screen. A single message from Marcus. 4 words, different from Rourke's 4 words, but carrying the same weight of compression. Too much information packed into too small a space, the way messages read when the person sending them has run out of time. Ellis talked. Rourke lied. And beneath it, a second message, arriving even as she read the first. There's a 3rd team. They're already in the building. Selena's head snapped up. She looked at the elevator. She looked at the stairwell door at the far end of the lobby. She looked at Damien, who was already moving, pulling her with him, his free hand going inside his jacket to where she now understood something was kept, and the lobby of the safe building. The safe building, the one she had chosen, the one she had moved her mother to, was suddenly, the lobby was not safe anymore. Selena understood this in the same instant Damien's hand tightened on hers. Not the gradual understanding of someone processing new information, but the immediate full-body comprehension of a woman who had spent her entire life reading rooms for the specific moment when they stopped being survivable. He pulled her toward the stairwell door at the far end of the lobby, not running, moving with the controlled urgency of someone who understood that running in a situation like this told anyone watching exactly where you were going and how frightened you were. And both of those things were information you didn't want to give away. Your mother, she said low. Marcus is already calling the floor, he said, equally low. Move. She moved. The stairwell door opened onto a concrete shaft lit by fluorescent tubes mounted in cages on the walls, the kind of institutional lighting that turns everyone's face the same gray-green, and Damien pulled the door shut behind them and held it for 1 second, listening. Footsteps. Above them. Moving down. He looked up the stairwell and then back at her and said, 2. Coming from above, which means they were already in the building when Marcus sent the message. How? She said. The negotiation, he said. Rourke kept us in that restaurant for 40 minutes, long enough for a team to position. His jaw was tight. I walked into it. He used the conversation as the distraction. She thought about Rourke at his table, hands wrapped around his coffee cup, looking like someone's grandfather, running the clock. The terms, she said. The agreement was real, Damien said. The agreement was real. This is Rourke covering one more position before the ceasefire takes, something he needed to retrieve before going quiet. He was listening to the footsteps above them. Something or someone in this building. She looked up the stairwell. 9th floor. Her mother on the 9th floor, in a room at the end of a hallway, asleep, or not asleep, because the lobby lights had flickered, and her mother noticed things. Her mother had always noticed things. I have to get to her, Selena said. I know. He looked at her. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I tell you. If I tell you to go, you go. You don't look back. You don't wait. You go. Damien, Selena. His voice was quiet and total. Do you trust me? She looked at him in the fluorescent light of the stairwell, damp from the rain, the exhaustion of the evening in the lines around his eyes, and she thought about everything she had learned about trust in 30 years of learning it the hard way. That it was not a feeling, not a leap of faith, not the absence of fear. It was a decision made with available evidence by a person who had done the accounting. She had done the accounting. Yes, she said. They went up. The footsteps above them stopped at some point between the 3rd and 4th floor, which meant whoever it was had heard them and gone still, which meant the stairwell was now a listening exercise. 2 groups of people on the same concrete stairs, both of them measuring sound and distance and the specific quality of silence that tells you how close something is. Damien moved with a deliberateness that she matched, placing her feet the way he placed his, staying one step behind his right shoulder, keeping the distance between them close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold stairwell air. On the fifth-floor landing, a door opened above them. Not carefully. Fast. The kind of fast that meant either panic or aggression, and in this context, panic was unlikely. Damien stopped. She stopped behind him. A voice came down the stairwell. Blackthorn. Not a question. An announcement. The voice of a man who wanted to be heard. Damien said nothing. We're not here for you, the voice said. We're not here for the woman. We need the other one. Give us Marsh and everyone walks out. Selena's stomach clenched. Diane. They were here for Diane Marsh, who was... She ran the calculation and landed on it fast. Not in this building. Diane had not come to the residence. After the restaurant, after Rourke's agreement, Diane had gotten into a separate car arranged by Marcus and gone to a location that Selena didn't know, which meant these men didn't know that. They had come for something that wasn't here. She leaned close to Damien's ear and said, barely audible, She's not here. He gave the smallest nod. He already knew. He raised his voice. Marsh isn't in this building. A pause from above. You're lying. I'm not, Damien said. Check whatever information you have. She left 3 hours ago. Different car, different location. Another pause. You've been sent on a bad errand. That's Rourke's problem, not mine. Silence in the stairwell. The specific silence of people above you conferring in near inaudible murmurs. Then, the old woman. The woman on 9. Selena's hand found Damien's arm. She's not Marsh either, Damien said. She has nothing to do with any of this. She's leverage, the voice said. Flat. Practical. Until we confirm Marsh's location. Damien was quiet for 1 second. 1 second in which Selena felt every muscle in him make a decision. Listen to me, he said, and his voice changed. Not louder, harder. The boardroom voice stripped of its professional register. What was underneath it fully present? The voice of a man who had been 22 years old with a skill set and no legal outlet for it, and who had spent 8 years getting clean of that and carried every day of it in the specific weight of what he was capable of when he chose to be. You're going to walk back up those stairs. You're going to leave this building, and you're going to tell Rourke that he has until 6 a.m. to confirm the ceasefire holds, or I will dismantle everything he's built down to the foundation, and I will not use lawyers to do it. A long silence, then footsteps. Moving up, not down. The sound of a door opening and closing 2 floors above them. Gone. Selena breathed. They'll be back, she said. No, he said. They won't. He was already moving up the stairs again. Rourke sent them on a job that didn't exist. When they report back, he'll have to explain why he sent a team into a building during an active ceasefire negotiation for a target who wasn't there. That's a credibility problem inside his own operation. He pushed through the door to the 6th-floor corridor. He's not going to compound it. She followed him into the corridor. You knew that. That's why you told them about Marsh immediately. You knew it would unravel their justification. I knew it was a possibility, he said. Come on. They took the elevator from 6 to 9. The stairwell had served its purpose and the elevator was faster, and speed mattered now. She watched the numbers change on the panel above the doors and breathed in and out with the deliberate control of someone managing their nervous system through an act of will. The elevator opened on 9. Marcus was in the hallway, not standing near the elevator, but positioned at the far end, outside the door of her mother's room, with the focused stillness of a man who had been standing guard over something specific and was deeply relieved to see the people he was waiting for. Clear, he said when they reached him. She's inside. She knows something's wrong. Selena knocked twice and said her name and heard the lock disengage from the inside. Her mother had put the chain on, had done it automatically, which meant her mother had assessed the flickering lights and the quality of silence in the building and made a decision without anyone telling her to. The door opened. Her mother stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, with her hair loose and her eyes alert and her arms crossing her chest in the posture she used when she was frightened and refusing to show it, which was the most familiar posture Selena had ever seen on another human being because she wore it herself. Come in, her mother said. Both of you. You look terrible. They went in. The room was small and neat, and her mother had turned on every lamp, which was what she did when she felt unsafe. Flooded the space with light, because darkness was where things happened that you didn't see coming. Selena sat on the edge of the bed and felt the sustained adrenaline of the last 3 hours begin its slow withdrawal and leave behind the true exhaustion underneath. Her mother sat beside her and didn't touch her, just sat close, which was sometimes the better version of the same thing. Damien stood near the window. He looked at the courtyard below, the small garden with its nighttime shapes, and he looked like a man processing the residue of something. "It's over," Selena said. To her mother, to herself, to the room in general. Her mother said, "Tell me." So she did. All of it. She sat on the edge of the bed in the room her mother had been moved to as a precaution that had turned out to be insufficient in ways she hadn't anticipated, and she told her mother the whole story from the beginning. The placement, Carl Duvane's call, the superintendent, the residents, Rourke, the stairwell. She left nothing out. She had spent too long managing information into digestible pieces for people she was trying to protect, and her mother was done being protected by omission. Her mother listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, without performing reactions, with the deep, attentive patience of a woman who understood that some stories need to run their full length before you respond to them. When Selena finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Damien. "You did all of this," she said, "for my daughter." "I did it because it needed doing," he said. He turned from the window. The rest was... He paused. The rest was for her. Her mother looked at him for a long time with the three-question expression. She had already asked the questions. She was now applying the answers. "Sit down," she said to him. "You've been standing since you got here." He sat. The three of them sat in the lamplit room while the last of the rain withdrew from the city outside the window, and the night moved toward its quietest hour. And nobody said anything for a little while. And the silence was not the silence of things unsaid, but the silence of things that had been said and were now being absorbed. At 4 a.m, Marcus knocked and came in to report that 2 of Rourke's men had been picked up 2 blocks from the building by the city police on an outstanding warrant. Not arranged by Damien, just the ordinary bad luck of men who had accumulated legal problems and chosen a bad night to be visible. The third had left in a car that was already being tracked. The building was clear. Rourke called at 4:47. Damien stepped into the hallway to take it. Selena sat on the bed beside her mother and listened to the murmur of his voice through the door and could not make out words, only tone, the controlled, hard-edged quality of it at first, then something that shifted over several minutes towards something more negotiated, more final. He came back in. "It's done," he said. "He's pulling back. The third team has been stood down." He confirmed the terms from the restaurant. 60 days, structured wind-down, verification included. "You believe him," Selena said. "He has nothing left to leverage," Damien said. "Ellis is in police custody. Diane Marsh is in a location he can't find without resources he no longer has in this city. The superintendent deal is done. Every piece he moved tonight came back empty." He looked at her steadily. "He's a pragmatist. Pragmatists accept when the board is unfavorable." Her mother stood up. She crossed the room to the small kitchen counter and filled the electric kettle and plugged it in and stood with her back to both of them while the water heated, and Selena recognized this too. The need to do something physical and ordinary when the emotional weight of a situation became too large for sitting still. "The boyfriend," her mother said. She didn't turn around. Selena looked at Damien. "He's one of the 8, Damien said carefully, to her mother's back. In the 60-day structure, his arrangement with Rourke's network ends. Without that backing, without the financial structure and the protection it provided him, he has very little. The housing violations on his own record give you grounds for a protective order that a judge will sign." He paused. "He won't have anywhere left to put the weight." Her mother stood at the counter. The kettle began to make its preliminary noise. 2 years, her mother said. Nobody answered because there was no answer that was adequate to 2 years. "I knew," her mother said. "I knew it was wrong from the beginning. I didn't know how wrong, but I knew." The kettle clicked off. She poured it without turning around. "I stayed because I was tired. because I was 60 years old and tired of starting over, and I told myself I could manage it. Her voice was even but thin at the edges, the way voices get when they're working hard to carry something heavy. I put my daughter in harm's way by staying. Mom, Selena said. Let me say it. Her mother turned around. She was holding 2 cups and her eyes were dry, which was something Selena had always found both admirable and heartbreaking about her. The refusal to cry in front of anyone, the privacy of her own grief. You have been protecting me since you were 15 years old. You learned to disappear and be quiet and stay safe because you grew up in rooms where those things were necessary, and I am the reason those rooms were the rooms you grew up in. The room was very still. I know that, her mother said. I have always known that. And I'm sorry. She set the cups down on the table with a deliberateness that was the physical form of a decision being made. I'm done being sorry and doing nothing about it. Selena got up from the bed. She crossed the room and took one of the cups and stood beside her mother and bumped her shoulder gently, the way she had done since she was small, the sides-long physical communication of the two of them. I hear you. I'm here. We're okay. Her mother bumped back. Damien sat in the chair near the window and watched the two of them and said nothing, which was correct. The remaining hours of the night moved slowly, the way time moves after a crisis when the body doesn't know what to do with the absence of urgency. Selena's mother fell asleep around 5:30, her head on a pillow that Selena had arranged without discussion, the automatic caregiving of someone who had been doing it in both directions for a long time. Selena sat in the chair beside the bed and watched her mother sleep and thought about things she had never let herself think clearly before, the specific weight of what it cost to be the person who held everything together in a family that needed holding, the years of it, the way that role had shaped her into someone extremely competent and extremely isolated, because competence at holding things together generally requires keeping people at a distance sufficient to maintain your grip. She thought about 6 months in a building 42 floors above the city, getting better at the distance, getting more precise in her competence, building walls that were increasingly well-crafted and increasingly lonely. She thought about coffee she hadn't asked for. She got up quietly and went to the window, and Damien was there, and they stood together in the early gray light that was beginning to separate itself from the dark. The specific threshold of pre-dawn when the city exists in 2 temporal states simultaneously, the last of the night and the first of the morning, overlapping. You should sleep, she said. Later, he said. She looked at him. In the gray light, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had been awake for 24 hours, who had negotiated a ceasefire and navigated a stairwell and held her hand in a lobby and meant every word of what he'd said to Rourke about what she was to him. Damien, she said. Selena, he said. I'm going to say something and I need you to just listen. He turned to face her fully. All right. I spent 6 months building a case against you, she said. Not because you gave me reasons, because I needed reasons to exist and you were the most convenient target. You were powerful and you were patient and you paid attention in ways that were difficult. I needed to make that into something threatening because if it wasn't threatening, it was something I didn't know how to hold. He was listening, not moving, just present. I was wrong, she said. Not about being careful. I'm never going to be a person who isn't careful, but about you specifically. I was wrong. He looked at her for a moment. You weren't wrong to be careful. I know, she said, but I was wrong about what I was being careful of. He reached out and tucked a piece of her hair back. A small, specific gesture. Not the dramatic declaration, just the intimate ordinariness of a person making contact with someone they are close to. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I want you to know that. Whatever this is, whatever you want it to be. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I know, she said, but I want to tell you something tonight anyway. Tell me. She looked at him in the pre-dawn gray, the city visible behind him through the window, beginning its slow morning reanimation, the first delivery trucks, the early commuters, the city's daily reinvention of itself. I trust you, she said. That's all. I wanted to say it out loud while I was sure of it, because sure feels like something you should say when you have it. Something happened in his face. Not dramatic, not the movie version of a man receiving the thing he's been waiting for. Just the quiet, private, completely real expression of a man who had been patient for a long time and had not been entirely certain the patience would be enough. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They stood at the window together and watched the city wake up. The weeks that followed were not simple. She had never expected them to be simple, and she would have been suspicious if they were, because nothing real was simple, and the things she was navigating were as real as anything she had ever encountered. Ellis Crane was charged formally within the week, the case built on his own statements, and the corroborating evidence that Damien's legal team had been quietly assembling for 3 months. He cooperated extensively once he understood the alternative, and his cooperation provided the structural evidence needed to accelerate the dismantling of Rourke's network significantly ahead of the 60-day schedule. Rourke upheld the ceasefire. Damien had been right about pragmatism. The 8 men in Rourke's network began their disengagement according to the terms, and by the end of the first month, 4 of them had legal proceedings against them that made their previous positions untenable. Her mother's boyfriend was third. He left the city 2 weeks before the protective order was filed, which her mother's lawyer said sometimes happened when men understood the legal architecture being built around them. Her mother moved into a new apartment on the other side of the city, not the residence, which had been temporary, but a place she chose herself with the specific deliberateness of a woman reclaiming the act of choosing. It had 2 bedrooms and a small terrace and a view of a park. She planted things on the terrace almost immediately, which Selena took as a reliable indicator of something important. Diane Marsh left the city. Selena didn't know where she went and didn't try to find out. There was a version of the story where Diane was a villain and a version where she was a person who had made bad choices inside a system designed to make good choices expensive, and Selena had spent enough years inside systems like that to understand that the 2 versions were not mutually exclusive. She stayed at Blackthorn Global. This surprised some people who knew the broad shape of what had happened, who assumed that the proximity to danger would make the job untenable. It didn't. She stayed because the work was real, and she was good at it, and because the 42nd floor had stopped being the site of a careful professional performance, and had become something more complicated and more honest than that. She and Damien moved toward each other the way people move toward something true. Not in a straight line, not without friction, not without the occasional confrontation that came from 2 people who were both accustomed to controlling their environments learning to share one. There were conversations that were difficult. There were evenings where she went home to her own apartment because she needed the space of her own walls around her, and he understood that without requiring explanation, which was one of the ways she kept learning who he was. He cooked on weekends. She had not anticipated this, had not built it into her model of him, though she probably should have, because the quality of attention he brought to everything else extended naturally to cooking, which turned out to be one of the few activities that consistently dismantled the controlled exterior completely. He was, in the kitchen, entirely himself, opinionated about olive oil, unreasonably specific about the temperature of the pan, capable of becoming genuinely annoyed at garlic for not cooperating. She found this, to her own considerable surprise, one of the most attractive things about him. Her mother came to dinner the first Sunday of every month. She had liked Damien from the lobby of the residence, which Selena had suspected, and she demonstrated this by arguing with him about everything except the things that mattered, which was her mother's version of affection. Damien received this without apparent discomfort and occasionally gave it back, which her mother appreciated in the specific way she appreciated people who didn't perform softness at her. The Blackthorn Foundation expanded. This was in part a product of the Rourke situation. The dissolution of the network left several community organizations that had operated in its shadow without the support structures they had built around it, and the foundation moved into several of those gaps with the particular efficiency of an institution run by a man who understood the territory intimately and an executive assistant who had learned to read needs before they were stated. Selena took on a larger role in the foundation's work. Not officially, not at first. It happened the way things happened between her and Damien, through proximity and competence, and the gradual accumulation of trust. By the 4th month, she was running the Survivor Services program directly, which involved a set of skills that turned out to include everything she had spent 30 years developing in the service of survival and had never before been able to use in the direct service of other people. She discovered, very good at talking to women who had learned to disappear in rooms. She understood the specific architecture of that kind of concealment in a way that no amount of training could replicate. She knew the language of it, the deflections, the minimizations, the way fear presents as practicality because practicality is more acceptable than fear. She knew because she had spoken it fluently for most of her life. She knew the moment you stopped speaking it, too. The specific quality of the room that changes when a woman decides, for the first time or the 20th time, that she's going to try being visible again. One evening in late autumn, she was finishing work on the Foundation's expanded grant proposal, a significant funding request to extend the Survivor Services program to 3 additional cities, when Damien appeared at her office door, which she now had rather than a desk outside his, a change that had happened through a series of practical conversations and had felt like something larger than the practical conversations described. "Done," he said. "Almost." She saved the document. 20 minutes. He leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms and looked at her with the expression she had learned to read as "I have something to say, and I'm deciding how to say it," which in practice meant she waited, because she had learned that the things he took time to decide how to say were generally worth waiting for. "The Foundation Board wants to name the Survivor Services Program," he said. She looked up. "Name it what?" "They haven't decided. They want input." He paused. "From you." She held his gaze for a moment. "That's not something I need," she said. "The program doesn't need my name on it." "No," he said. "But you built it. And sometimes the person who builds something should be visible in it." She thought about visibility. She thought about 30 years of the opposite. She thought about a woman who had learned to stand near the wall and keep her voice low and not let anyone see her hands shake, and who had found herself somehow in the middle of a life that was asking her to stand in the center of rooms and be seen. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded once, started to go. "Damien." He stopped. "In the stairwell," she said, "when you told me to stay behind you and do what you said, and then you asked if I trusted you." She looked at him. "That was the first time you asked me for something instead of giving it." He looked at her across the office, the city behind him through the window, the afternoon light coming through at an angle. "I know," he said. "I noticed," she said. "That's all." He stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then he said, "Come find me when you're done." She finished the grant proposal. She saved it and sent it and closed her laptop and put on her jacket. She looked around the office for a moment. The real office, with the window and the door that closed and the walls that were hers. And she thought about the woman who had stepped off the elevator on the 42nd floor 9 months ago in a silk turtleneck in the middle of July, trying to hold herself still and be invisible and survive the day. She thought about what that woman would make of this room, this evening, the work on the screen, the man down the hall. She thought that woman might not recognize the shape of it as something she had allowed herself to want, but she would recognize it as something true. And truth, in her experience, had always been more valuable than comfort. She turned off the light and went to find him. On the terrace of their apartment, hers and Damien's, the penthouse she had moved into without announcement or ceremony, the way she did most things that mattered through gradual accumulation rather than declaration, the city spread itself out below them like something that had finally run out of places to hide. It was a Friday evening in November, cold and clear, the kind of city night where the air has an edge and the lights of the buildings go all the way to the horizon, and you can see them so clearly that the distance becomes difficult to believe. She stood at the railing with her coffee, still 1 sugar, oat milk, the order he had been getting right for 9 months without being asked to. And she looked out at all of it. He came to stand beside her. He had his own coffee and his jacket and the quiet that had always been his natural register, and that she had learned, slowly, was not distance, but the deepest form of presence, the kind that doesn't require filling with sound. "Cold," he said. "Yes," she said. They stood together and looked at the city. She thought about her mother on her terrace across town, probably deadheading the last of the autumn plants before the first real frost, her hands in the dirt of a life she had chosen with full information. She thought about the women in the program, the ones she'd met in the last 4 months, the ones just beginning the process of learning to be visible again, the ones further along who sometimes came back to help the ones just beginning. She thought about the specific courage of women who had disappeared and decided one ordinary day to try the opposite. She thought about the night in the stairwell, the night in the lobby, the night she had told him she trusted him while her mother slept in the next room and the city was beginning to wake up outside the window. She thought about being 38 years old. She had turned 38 in September, a birthday Damien had acknowledged by putting flowers on her desk and making dinner and saying nothing else about it, which was exactly correct. and standing on a terrace in November with coffee and a man she had chosen with her full capacity for caution engaged. "I've been thinking," she said. "About the program name?" he said. "About more than that." She held her cup with both hands, feeling the warmth of it. "About what it would mean to stop waiting for the other shoe." He was quiet. "I've been waiting for the thing to go wrong," she said. "Since the beginning. I've been waiting for the version of you that I told you I was afraid you'd become. The version that wants something in return for all of it." She looked at the city. "It's been 9 months and the shoe hasn't dropped." "It's not going to," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the thing. I know." She turned to look at him. "I know, and I'm still waiting, and I think I need to stop." He looked at her in the cold, clear night air, with the city going all the way to the horizon behind her, and said, "What does stopping look like?" She thought about it, really considered it. What it actually looked like to stop waiting for a person to become the thing you'd feared, to stop treating love as a liability to be managed and start treating it as the thing it actually was. A decision made daily to extend your most careful self to another person and trust them to hold it. "It looks like this," she said, "telling you that I love you without putting anything after it. No qualifications, no disclaimers, no conditions I've built in to protect my exit." The city was very bright behind her. His face in the cold air was exactly itself. All the control and all the patience and all the thing underneath both of those that had been there since the beginning, that she had taken 9 months to let herself receive. "I love you," she said. That's the whole sentence. He set his coffee down on the railing. He turned to face her fully. He reached up and took her face in both his hands with the particular care of someone holding something that has cost a great deal to arrive at. And he looked at her for a long moment in the way that she had learned meant he was doing the same thing she was. Not performing the moment, but actually being inside it, fully present, not managing it from a distance. "I have loved you," he said, "since the morning you walked into my office and told me you didn't accept help from men with power because help became a leash." A pause. "I loved you because you were the first person in 20 years to say the truest thing in the room without being afraid of me first." She felt that in her chest, not the romantic version of it, the real version, the one that had weight and specificity and history in it. "You were afraid too," she said. "Yes," he said, "just of a different thing." "What?" "Being the reason you stopped trusting people," he said. "Being the thing that confirmed everything you already believed about men like me." His thumbs were against her cheeks, her face in his hands, the warmth of it against the cold air. "I was more afraid of that than of anything Rourke ever put in front of me." She covered his hands with hers. "You're not," she said. "You're the exception I stopped believing in." A breath. "You're the evidence that changed the conclusion." He kissed her then, in the cold November air on the terrace above the bright city, and she held on to him with both hands, and it was nothing like the movie version of this moment, which would have had music and better lighting, and neither of them wearing the particular residue of a 9-month negotiation with their own damage. It was better than the movie version. It was entirely specific to them, to who they each actually were, the ways they had each been broken and repaired imperfectly, the 9 months of careful work it had taken to arrive at this particular rooftop, this particular city night, this particular truth said plainly without conditions. When they separated, she stayed close to him, her face turned into the warmth of his shoulder, and she looked out at the city from inside the circle of his arms, and she thought about all the versions of this life that had been possible, the narrow paths through which the current version had arrived, the specific people and choices and catastrophes that had deposited her here on this terrace, in this city that had been her whole world and had never, until recently, felt like it had a place in it for her. It had a place now. She was standing in it. The bruises were long gone. She had known they would be. She had always healed quickly, physically. It was one of the things about her body she had relied on, the efficiency of its repair. But the other kind of healing, the internal re-architecture of a person who had built herself around surviving rather than living, that was slower, less linear, sometimes indistinguishable from the damage it was replacing. She was still in the middle of it. She expected to be for a long time, but she was in the middle of it with her full name, in a room she had chosen, beside a man she had looked at clearly and decided to trust. The city burned gold below them, the way it always did at this hour. The particular warmth of 10,000 lit windows against the cold, dark sky, And Selena Vale stood inside the life she had made from the wreckage of the life she'd survived, and felt, not happiness exactly, not the uncomplicated version, but something more durable than happiness. She felt like herself, the real version, the one she had been keeping in reserve for a long time, waiting for a world safe enough to spend it in. She spent it now. She spent all of it.